Okay, so we're looking at how to do macros. So I've got my Excel open. I've just opened it. I'm going to go ahead and find the developer menu. I know it's here somewhere, but I'm not seeing it. I got the Acrobat menu. What are we, a circus now? I don't know. Help, team, Microsoft Team. I don't know what this is. Where's my developer tab? Oh no, I must have some kind of beginner level of Excel, some kind of student edition or something. There's no developer tab. How many of you have a developer tab? A bunch of you already have a developer tab, probably because you've taken 515 and they showed you how to make it show. What's the trouble here? Here's the problem. It turns out that there is so much raw power available to you right at your fingertips with VBA that the good folks in Redmond, Washington do not want mere mortals playing with it. They really don't. And they figure if you can't figure out how to show the developer tab, we don't want you touching VBA. Really, we don't. Yeah, do you want my mother looking at the developer tab? No, no good can come of that. So the good news is it's not, you know, for all I know, I'm going to post this video on YouTube. For all I know, my mom's going to Google me someday and actually watch one of these videos. I can't believe the things you say about me in your class. Mom, I love you. Okay, so here's how we're going to do it. We choose File, Options. And then in Options, there's a choice on the left called Customize Ribbon. Then over here, you got all the ribbons, and there's one called Developer, and it's not checked. All you have to do is check it. By the way, you could uncheck any of these other ones. I mean, like if you're tired of the Home tab, we don't need that. You could just like uncheck it. We don't use that stuff ever. This semester, we're going to have April Fool's Day, which will be great. You know, maybe that's what that is for. It's there for April Fool's Day. Your roommate goes away, leaves his computer on. That would be a sin you'd have to repent. But I do encourage repentance, so maybe, I don't know. So, okay. So I checked the, I better check it. Check the developer tab, say okay, and now I've got the developer tab. So this is the tools that I need to be able to work with VBA. The truth is, we can get by kind of in the kiddie pool on the View menu. There's a Macros menu way over here, and you can record and view macros from here. We're going to work with the Developer tab. Now, any of you on the Mac that don't have the Developer tab showing? Okay, if you're listening to the recording, good luck on finding that. I think it's like, I think it's Excel, Preferences, and then there's something about modifying the ribbon in the preferences that come up. You'll get something that looks pretty similar to what we just saw. All right. So here we have we got some macros, whatever. Okay, so here's my plan. We're going to record a pretty simple macro, and then we're going to look at the code. And so let's just go ahead and do it. Let's just suppose, so we'll do this all together. But let's suppose that we find ourselves often needing to kind of format a page in a certain way. This is probably more likely to happen if you've got a report that you have to download from the website, like you've got some output that comes out of like Salesforce or something. And it comes as an Excel file, so you open it up, but you've got a bunch of changing you have to do to kind of get it. So, but it's in enough of a consistent format that you could say, wow, I could just do exactly the same actions and do what I'm trying to do here. Well, since we're starting with a blank worksheet here, we're just going to say, maybe we've got some report that we've got to collect some data, and so it's going to start with some header here. So before I start recording, I want to think to myself, where should the user be when they start running this macro? And wherever that is, whatever cell is selected, that's what I should have selected when I start to record. And the second thing I want to think about is, where should this macro leave off the active cell when I'm done? And I want to make sure that when I'm done doing what the macro does, that it goes to that leave off place, because that'll be part of what it records. Now, in this case, I don't really care where the user is, because wherever they are, the first thing I'm going to do is select A1, because I'm going to put kind of a header in here formatted. So I'm going to be anywhere except A1, because if I'm already on A1 and I click on A1, there's nothing to record. I didn't select A1. I didn't move to A1, so there's nothing to record there. So I'm going to make sure I'm off of it, and then I'll start recording. But because I'm putting a header in here, getting ready to just record some data, I'm going to want to make sure that I end up right in A2, because that's going to be the first place to enter data. Okay, so I'm not on A1, and I'm going to hit record macro. Okay, now this is, let me zoom in just a bit here. This now is asking me, all right, what do you want to call the macro? Let's see, I'm going to call this, why don't we call it customer billing header. I don't know, that's the best name. Ah, but look at this. They let us have a shortcut key. Well, this is for customers, so I'm going to put Control C, customers. I want to call it Control C. Wait a minute, that sounds familiar. What does Control C do? Not anymore, it doesn't. Now Control C runs this macro. Okay, do you see why you don't want my mom playing with this? It turns out that there are 25 letters that are already mapped as control characters in VBA. So what do you think the one is that isn't? What the one letter that's not mapped from the keyboard? You might want to assign this to a macro, so it's M. It happens to be M. You can do Control M, and you wouldn't be stepping on anybody's toes. Every single other letter is pre-assigned. But I want C. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a capital C in there, and like magic, that will change to Control plus Shift plus C. Because almost all of the regular letters are done, I never record a macro with just a Control keystroke. It's always Control plus Shift to be able to get to it. Now, I have three options on where to store this macro that I'm about to record. I could put it in this workbook. That's the workbook I currently have open, the one I'm working on. Now, why does it make sense to put it in this workbook? If I put the macro in this workbook, it will be available wherever this workbook goes. If this workbook goes to a different computer, the macro goes with it. So if it only applies to this workbook, it should be in this workbook. I've got the workbook open, macro will be available. That'll be great. But in this case, I want this, I'm going to have lots of different workbooks that I want to apply this to. And so in that case, I probably should choose the personal macro workbook. The truth is, any macro is available as long as it is in an open workbook. It doesn't have to be in the workbook that you are currently using. It has to be in an open workbook. So you could make a workbook that you just call My Macros. And you put a bunch of macros in it. And whenever you want those macros, you open up that workbook. You can hide it if you want. Open up that workbook, and then all your macros will be available. Well, that's exactly what the personal macro workbook is. It's just a workbook that once you record a macro in there, every other time you open Excel, Excel is going to open the personal macro workbook and hide it. Because those will be macros that are in an open workbook. That's what it is. So your computers are mostly fast enough, that's not a big deal, but back when I first started teaching this, having an extra workbook open, you know, was an issue on performance on your computer. So I used to tell people, don't, you know, unless you really need this open all the time, don't put it in the personal macro workbook. But now if it's something you think you're going to use in lots of different places, that's a good place to put it. I'm not going to put it there. I'm going to put it in this workbook. My other option is to make a new workbook for it. That's mostly useful if you're recording something on a workbook that is like locked, like so you can't actually get to the code. Then you could be recording something happening to that workbook, but you could then put it off into another workbook where you could catch the code. I'm going to put it in this workbook. Description, make the customer billing header in A1 of the active sheet. All right, now when I say okay, I've got to be careful because now everything I do is being recorded. Well, the truth is, even before I press okay, everything I do is being recorded in heaven. But now it's being recorded in Excel too. I got to be extra careful. Not to be too careful, because I could always, you know, go delete stuff. When you look at the code, you'll get familiar with that. So step one, I'm recording. Step one, I'm just going to click on A1. And so, I wasn't sure. Was I on A1? I thought it was off. I'm going to go ahead and click off of it again and go back to it. For sure, that will record, go to A1. It turns out if you click like all over the place, it's like recording where you're going, but it's going, you know what, you didn't do anything there. That wasn't important. And it just remembers the last one. So it's only going to remember you went to A1. So if you're, you know, kind of doing something like a game show and you wanted to go and select them and, you know, pop, oh, Jeopardy, we're going to take, you know, Excel problems for 500, please. That won't do it. You could make it do that, but recording it, it won't record. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put the information in. Customer ID. C-U-S-T-O-M-E-R-I-D. Project, start time, end time, activity, employee, approval. I don't really have any idea what we should do here, but, or even what these things mean, but I'm going to kind of resize some of these columns. The project's gonna be a little longer. Start time, probably just long enough to show start time. Whoops, that's supposed to be activity. I'm gonna go change that. Activity will be a little bit longer. Employee will be a little bit longer. Approval, maybe that's just someone's initials. I don't know, maybe that's just fine being short. So now I am going to, whoops, I'm gonna highlight that and I'm gonna make it bold. And I think I'm going to put like a light blue background on it. And maybe I'll put a double underline under it. Wait, is that an option right here? Double underline underneath. Top and bottom double underline, bottom double border, there we go. That looks pretty good. I like it. So now I'm done, except I want to end off in A2. And so now I'm done. That's what I wanted to do. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop. Very important to remember to stop recording. Oh, by the way, where do you hit stop? On your developer tab, the button that used to be record macro now says stop recording. But also right down here, probably right behind my head for some of you, right down here is a little stop button when you're recording, so you can just always just come and stop right there. Apparently this mouse likes to double click sometimes. Anyway, there we've stopped. Okay, so now I should have that macro, and there's several different ways that I can invoke it. Let me go ahead and make a new sheet, and I'll run that macro. What was it? Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-C. Boom, there it does. It went and put that right back in for me. How very nice. I'll delete that line. How else could I invoke it? On my View menu over here, I've got macros. I can choose macros, and now here's the list of macros. I can choose Run, and it would run it. I've got the same list on my Developer tab, so I could, get to that same list a different way. I could put a picture, like I actually put an image on this page, and I could say, when you click on this, run the macro. I could put a button on the page. I will show you, it'll be later in the class, but I will show you how to add a custom tab into the ribbon and put a button on that tab that runs your macro. That impresses people. It turns out it's not very easy to do. You can put a button onto your ribbon that runs a macro on your Excel. That's easy. But making that ribbon modification so it follows the workbook, wherever the workbook goes, that's a little more difficult. I'll show you how to do it. It would impress your mom. All right. So, but also from here, developer macros, I've got the ability to edit this macro. That's what we want to do next. We want to take a look at what we recorded and see what we've got going on. So I'm going to click on Edit. I'm glad you're all seated because it might be a little shocking. Because Excel is going to look very different than you've ever seen it look before. Don't be alarmed. Your old Excel is still there. It's just open up a new window. That's your Visual Basic for Applications editor. Now, I've got this little tiny font here, which is probably okay on your computer, but I want it to be a little bit bigger for the class. So I'm going to change the font, but I want you to come along with me because there's a couple of other settings that will make your life a little bit better as we're going. So I'm going to come to the Tools menu, and I'm going to choose Options. So Tools, Options. And here, the very first two choices are backwards. Auto syntax check is checked by default. What that means is if you're coming along here and you say, let's see, I'm setting the formula here for something, I'm going to change that. So I took away one of those quotes. Oh, wait a minute, I've got to go copy it from somewhere. And I go down. Oh, it puts the close quote in it. So let me take them both off. And I go down, it says, hey, that's wrong. And it puts a little message up here. The OK button closes this message. The Help button will open a website that is guaranteed to give you no help whatsoever. I think somebody at Microsoft thinks it's going to help you, but it won't. And there's no, this just gets to be so annoying to have this thing pop up. And what's worse is when you're trying to hit Tab and you're going to hit Tab Enter and you hit Tab Enter, not realizing it's popped open the dialog box and you got to wait for the window to open and then realize there really isn't any help there and close it. So it is nice to get this little red line saying, hey, I couldn't understand this, but I don't want the dialog box. Good news. If I choose Tool, Options, and say Auto Syntax Check, it's exactly what I'll get. It won't put up the dialog box. It will still show red if I have an error in the line. So that's great. And then I'm going to put on Require Variable Declaration. We'll talk about this later, but it just might be good for us to start right there. Now, I'm also going to change my font size. Your font is probably OK just the way it is, but I'm going to change it. And it's kind of fun here because we can see the world's smallest scroll bar right here. It's a scroll bar with no bar. I mean, the bar just doesn't fit. It really is a scroll bar. You can see there's a little line in there where the scroll bar is, but it's like 1 pixel wide. OK, so I got to go to type this in. MS sans serif. There we go. Whew. And now let me just bump this up to like 20 or something. I love this, though. You could have 18 points or 23 or 24. I guess 24. OK, there we go. Hopefully you can see this a little bit better now. OK, so when we make a macro, what we're saying is, you know, record for me all the steps that I did until I say stop recording, and you give them to me in a set that I can run them all again. And the structure in VBA that the macro recorder makes is called a sub procedure. It's identified by the keyword sub. And then we see the name of the macro that we recorded. And then all these steps are part of the macro right until we get to the end sub. Now, all of this code is in this thing here called a module. Anytime we have code that we're going to save, it's going to be in a module. We can write some code in other places in Excel that doesn't get saved. It's just a place for us to play. But if it's code that gets saved, it's going to be in some kind of a module. And you may think, oh, each macro goes into its own module. No, no, no. You can have as many macros as you want. I could have another macro that starts right after this one. It just says sub, the name of another macro. They just go one right after another here. So here it is. Let's take a look at what we have. First thing that we see here are these little parentheses, an open and closing parentheses. And we're going to learn how to use those later. They're syntactically, they have to be there. In fact, if you take it off, will it put them back in? Yeah, it just puts them back in. They got to be there. There's some interesting things we can do that, but not today. So then we see here the idea of a comment, single quote. Anytime I have a single quote, anything that comes after it is just a note to some future programmer. You know, if I'm doing something that might be a little hard to understand, I could put a comment in there. By the way, who is that future programmer most likely to be? Yeah, you. After 2 or 3 weeks, maybe longer for those of you with better memories than me, you'll come back to this code and you'll be, my gosh, this code is terrible. Who wrote this? It won't look familiar at all. And then you'll see, oh, you left a comment. Oh, that was me. I wrote this. It doesn't take very long for you to get unfamiliar with your code. So the programmer you may help may very well be yourself. OK. So I love this comment here. Right? We made the macro. The name is right here. In case you're wondering, this is that macro. And we're going to put that here for you again. Here's the comment that we made when we recorded it. And it remembers that we did Control-Shift-C as a shortcut key. What do you think? What if I change this to Control-Shift-D? Does that change anything? Change this comment, and that's all, because this doesn't get interpreted. Comments are just for humans to read. So here's the first line that we recorded. Oh, this is so interesting. I wondered why I couldn't see what my active cell was. So I must have done something that activated a different workbook. So when I clicked on cell A1, so these first things I recorded totally unintentionally. Oh, so it wasn't a new workbook. That's what happened. Yeah, so it looks like I inadvertently put this in a new workbook. In fact, yeah, here it is in book 2. Thank you very much for noticing that. Yeah, I thought I was recording in book 1. That's fine. So I am going to just get rid of those. I'll just delete those first 3 lines. This is the one that I expect you have first. Is that right for most of you? OK, so this really kind of gets us into the language here. What we're seeing here is the first thing is an object. We are identifying something, and then we're doing something with it. So VBA is an object-oriented language. Some people who are really purists will take issue with that. And they'll say there's some things that object-oriented languages are supposed to have that VBA doesn't have. But the truth is we can make our own object classes. We can instantiate instances of those objects. It really is an object-oriented language. It's maybe not fully featured, but it can do object-oriented kinds of stuff. And so this is an object. We say an object-oriented language, it means that the way that we organize things is around objects. Now, it turns out object-oriented languages were developed for the first time in the 1960s. They became popular in the 1980s. And in the early 1990s, I was taking my very first object-oriented programming class. It may have very well have been in this very room. I think it was down the hall a little bit. And the language was C++, and I was 3/4 of the way through the class before I realized I still had no idea what an object was. I don't know how that could have possibly happened. I was too embarrassed to ask other people, hey, do you know what an object is? I was 3/4 of the way back. Hey, what's an object? You're in luck. I'm going to tell you what an object is today. Are you ready? An object is a thing. They could have called it thing-oriented programming, and it would have been called TOP, thing-oriented programming. That would have been better than OOP, object-oriented programming. But object is just a thing. Specifically, it's a thing that we can manipulate through code. Now, objects have two characteristics that can be really important to us, and here's one of them. So what we're seeing here, range A1, that identifies an object. Can you guess what object that is? Yeah, it's a particular cell, A1. It turns out we don't ever really say cell A1. We say range A1 because the language says, like, I don't care if the range is 1 cell or 1,000 cells. It's a range. So it's a single cell range. We call it range A1. We see the dot. The dot, the period, the dot tells us, what came before this was an object. What comes after it is something else. And the prime candidate is one of two things. It's either going to be a property or a method. In this case, it's a method. What's a method? A method is something that the object knows how to do. Now, what's not happening here? What might be tempting to say here, to look at this and think, apparently in VBA, there's some activity called select. VBA knows how to select, and I am just telling it to select range A1. That is not what's happening. VBA does not know how to select. This object knows how to make itself active. It knows how to select itself. And so the select is actually a method of the object. So this is an instruction that is built into the object. Objects have the ability to do things. They have methods, and that's what they're called. So we have an object, we're calling a method. And as you can guess what this is, we've identified an object, we're telling it to do something, and that is an instruction. That's very important in VBA that you understand that every line has to be an instruction. Tell me your name. Ryan or Brian? Ryan? Ryan. So if I said Ryan, select A1. If you were there at Excel, I said select A1. Would you know what to do? Yeah, you select A1. That's a full instruction. What if I said, Ryan, select? Select what, right? So the method's not enough by itself. What if I said, Ryan, A1? I know what I would do. I'd go get myself a barbecue and a steak, and I'd make a steak. Some A1 sauce. If all you're telling me is A1, I know what to do. See, but it's not enough to, it's not enough to be clear about what we're talking about. And so, but a method, it's interesting here, a method by itself is an instruction. The method is that object knows how to do something. Now, let's take a look at the next thing here. So we select that cell, and now we're identifying the object. What's the object? Active cell. I'm not sure active cell itself really is an object, but clearly active cell identifies an object. So this might be some part of the language that says, go figure out what object is active, but this now identifies an object. So I see the dot, and now this now is either going to be a method or it's going to be a property. So a method is something the object knows how to do. A property is like a value that describes the way the object is. Can you see how when I change the value of the formula R1C1 property, it changes something about A1? Yeah, it's going to change what that cell is showing. There are actually several different properties we could use. We could have used the formula property. Formula R1C1 has some really neat things about it. There's a formula property. There's also a value property. We could have done any of those, set them equal to some new value, and the equal sign says here, this is an assignment. It says whatever is on the right-hand side, put it in what's in the left-hand side. And so we are changing this. So we've seen the two basic characteristics that we are going to live and breathe for the next 3 months together. Objects have methods, something to do, and objects have properties, something that describes the way they are. And as you look through this code, you see that's all what it is. Object, property, object, property. We come down here and we see, oh, here's another object. Whoa, whoops. Different object, but we're changing the property of that object. And so because this is one of the great things about VBA, and especially learning it as a first language, especially in Excel, is the macro recorder in Excel is excellent. And it does a really good job of recording what you do. And so in many languages, when you learn a new language, how many of you, I'll get you in a second, but how many of you have learned a language besides VBA? So about half of you here. What do you do when there's something in the language you don't know how to do? Yeah, Google. And in fact, that's going to be a handicap for you in this class because you're going to think, how do I do that in VBA? You just go start Googling it. What's the first thing you should do if you don't know how to do it in VBA? Record yourself doing it because the macro recorder knows how to do it. Well, it doesn't know how to do everything. But if you want to, I wonder how I make a pivot table, just record yourself doing it. It'll show you the code. So it's a great thing to get started. There's a question here and then we'll call it good.
Can you go through the methods and properties?
Yeah, so the question is, what is a method? So an object is a thing. A method is it's some activity the thing knows how to do. So in this case, when we say range A1 select, we are telling A1 to select itself. We are not telling VBA to select A1. We are telling A1 to select itself, to make itself active. The property is just some value that describes the way the object is. So when I put customer ID into this property of the active cell object, it changes the way that object appears. Now, it doesn't always have to change its appearance, but it has to change its state. It has to change the way it is. It might change something that's non-visual, but it's changing the way the object is. So properties tell me about how the object is. Method is telling the object to do something. We'll call that good, and we will pick up with whatever content we have next time we get together. No homework until further notice.